I think I left this on a cliffhanger, uh, and that is that I think what we need to understand about workplaces around the world is that they are set up to be legally enshrined autocracies. Mm-hmm. So, and this is actually based on a very medieval idea of the master-servant relationship, which accords a great deal of rights and power to the employer and requires employees to obey their employer, basically. And so, and this is why there is structuralized cognitive dissonance that we experience in our lives. So just thinking about this, for literally 50% of our waking lives, those of us who work for a traditional employer are are living in an autocracy. It's this recognition that has led states across the world to find ways to regulate that autocracy, to ameliorate the exigencies of an autocracy, of the implications from an autocracy. And so this is why we have minimum standards legislation, minimum hours of work or maximum hours of work, minimum amounts of pay, so on and so forth. But it's also why we have human rights legislation that applies to the workplace context. Because in the absence of human rights legislation, in Canada, up until somewhere around the year 2009, it was permissible to harass employees. So I started teaching and doing this work in the 1990s, and when I would teach my students at the Center for Industrial Relations at the University of Toronto, I'd say to them, in a rather jokingly way, go and harass whoever you want, because it's not illegal unless it's based on a protected ground. And I said that because I had the opportunity to see many investigation reports who would simply say, I'm not looking into the facts of this case because there's no protected ground advanced here. And so, obviously, employers do not have complete control over employees. There is criminal law. You can't beat your employees anymore. That's a violation of criminal law.
Yeah.
But so there is this rather broad spectrum. And this is the context in which people do not feel safe raising complaints and concerns. This is actually forms a part of the organizational culture for almost every organization across the world. It forms a part of that organizational culture. And so legislators have tried very hard in some jurisdictions to find a way to make it work within the context of accepting the basic principle that that they are regulating an autocracy. And so with occupational health and safety legislation, for example, in the 1970s in Canada, one of the big revolutionary changes that was made was that employees or workers had a right to participate in assessing safety and developing measures and implementing those measures. And so this is something that is now starting to find its way into the realm of harassment. And it's for a very simple purpose. If you understand trauma and how trauma works, you know that involvement and influence, participation is necessary to make people feel safe in raising issues. People feel much safer to raise an issue about a physical safety concern in workplaces in Canada. They feel quite safe to, there's a live wire sitting in some water there. The culture, our cultures, our quote unquote safety cultures, have encouraged people to look at this as a good thing. That you want to identify this problem so that it can be managed. The same can't be said for harassment. Nobody has ever told, no workplace that I'm familiar with has ever told their employees that it's a good thing that they raise complaints about harassment. And so this is something that, as we sort of move along here, and there is a relationship, by the way, with the ADR community in this, a direct relationship with this. Look at mediation, for example. Why does mediation work? It works because of voluntariness, because of agency, and because of active participation so people are making their own decisions. They're not being forced upon them. That's what happens when it works. So what we have learned a long time ago from the ADR community is now starting to be thought about in the context of harassment. But I think it goes deeper than that, because with respect for the ADR community, I don't think there's been especially in the workplace context, I don't think that there's been a very up until recently, a very deep understanding of trauma and how trauma works. And so this is, interestingly enough, this is a struggle I have with some of my clients. When I say to them, even if we're doing an investigation using a trauma-informed approach, this is going to take a lot longer to do, right? Because we need to give people space. We need to allow them to, their resiliency, time for them to operationalize their resiliency as we go through this. But for many employers, well, I have this tick box that says I'm legally required to investigate. That's what I'm worried about, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much. This is a masterclass. I also want to highlight from what you said about individual conflict escalating to a group conflict, and how can people in the workplace or HR organizational leaders, how can they come the individual conflict not to escalate to a group conflict? And also your work is focused on fairness in the workplace. So how can this Can you expand on how fairness in the workplace can prevent such behavior or even comb it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And this is something that is central to this is essentially our vision at Workplace Fairness International, is that there's a direct relationship between fairness and conflict. And here's how that relationship works. It takes us back to this idea that all conflict starts with a perceived injurious event. How does an event become perceived to be injurious? This is where fairness comes in. All perceptions of injury that are psychological, perceptions of psychological injury, are really perceptions of unfairness. And when I define fairness as equity of concern and respect for each individual in the workplace, regardless of their position in the workplace. And what that requires, what fairness actually requires, is three things out of organizations: communication, collaboration, and proactive thinking. And the reason why it requires that has to do with this idea of perception. So let's just take an example here. We're in an open office environment, and there's a coffee machine, and the understanding is that each one of us is going to take a turn at changing the coffee filter and so on and so forth. And so I show up one morning and I see the coffee filter hasn't been changed, and your name is on the list. Okay, there's an opportunity for a perceived injurious event to happen here. And the injury is, I'm not getting my coffee, and I'm not being respected because somebody else didn't do their job. So that's the potential perceived injurious event. But let me put it to you that I might be thinking about something different altogether. I might be thinking, oh, Chinwe, what's happened to her? Is she sick? Did she break her leg? You know what? I might be quite concerned about that, rather than making these negative attributions about you. What's the difference between these two things? The difference has to do with relationship. If my relationship with you is a very positive relationship and has a long history of trust, then I'm more likely to have the second response, that there's no perceived injurious event, there's concern about what's happened to you, and that sort of thing. If, on the other hand, my relationship with you is relatively negative, or even if it's perhaps neutral and I don't know much about you, then as a matter of course, as the fight-flight response kicks in, it manifests itself with negative attributions. So the negative attribution that I'm going to make right away is that you're irresponsible, you're lazy, or whatever else it is. So, and because of a lack of respect, this now growing lack of respect that I have with you, instead of having a conversation with you, I'm going to go to my posse, and we're going to talk about what a lazy, irresponsible person you are. This is how fairness works. So let's step this back now, and let's look at how we operationalize fairness. If we were going to turn the clock back and look at this situation, and by the way, the real story is, you have said to me at some point, you've said, I don't even drink coffee, And so I don't even know why I'm on this list. And so being proactive about this, what might have been decided by the organization is, okay, we have this process for managing the coffee. Let's have a proactive discussion about whether this process is fair to everyone. Let's actually bring it up at the staff meeting. We'll have a talk about it. We'll do a roundtable discussion. Everybody will talk it through. And if our consensus is collaboration now, if our consensus is that we need to make a change, then let's talk about that change. Let's decide upon it. Let's make it. And then we're all good to go. This is the relationship between fairness and conflict. And it's the reason, fairness is the reason why conflict will not escalate. Just like it's the reason why conflict will escalate. A lack of fairness will result in the escalation of conflict, or the transformation of conflict, to put it in the terms of Rubin, Pruitt, and Kim, which is more important to understand than escalation. This of course is critically important to us in the workplace context, because very few conflicts happen in isolation from each other. They're all interrelated, and they morph. One of the transformations that the authors talk about is the transformation of few to many. So it might have started off with a coffee machine, but now it's going to the dishes in the sink, and then it's going to how loudly people speak in the open office environment while other people are trying to work. So the issues start to proliferate. This is actually why this is the main reason why at Workplace Fairness International we have advocated for this proposition, that the best managed conflict is conflict that never happened. If you get fairness right, you will reduce the risk of perceived injurious events happening, and therefore reduce the risk of naming, blaming, and claiming, of conflict transformation, of negative attributions, of all that stuff, right? And we can see, I mean, as a matter of practice, I've seen organizational leaders in some organizations, the way they operate through communication, collaboration, being proactive, they have a much easier time of things in their workplace than those who aren't collaborative, who don't communicate effectively with people, and aren't proactive in their thinking. Like, it should come as no surprise to anyone that perceived injurious events are bound to happen. And therefore, we can forecast what kinds of things could cause those perceived injurious events and reduce the risk of that happening. And to me, if you really want to tackle harassment in the workplace, you start by reducing the risk of harassment from arising in the first place, because that is where there will be no trauma suffered. Once harassment happens, it has happened.
Yeah.
And people are already suffering trauma.
So thank you so very much, Blaine. I'm trying to get to this. How can we create safe spaces via ADR? How can we get these organizational leaders to HR, employers to embrace fairness? Because you find out that that's not the case in most organizations. The leaders and HR, they are not usually fair. So what is can you give us some tips, to get them?
Yeah. So and I'll have to wrap up here. I've got to make another call, but
okay, thank you.
You know, we have developed a whole program for HR professionals and ADR professionals on how to identify workplace culture, sources of conflict, identify the existing conflict management system that's in place, to evaluate it, and to come up with change and to sell the change. And we've done this precisely to answer the question you've just asked, which is what we're talking about shouldn't be this way, but it is perceived to be revolutionary in the workplace context. And it really shouldn't be. This is just a matter of common sense. You can forecast other risks in the organization. You can also forecast the risk of conflict if you understand it well and you understand your systems well. So in our process, we have 21 measures for a strong conflict management system. You know, and you can sort of, you know, people can take the program. We also offer live training on this, by the way. We do it twice a year, so far twice a year, through the ADR Institute of Ontario. And you know, and on the basis of that, you can develop recommendations to change your conflict management approach that are going to be quite effective for that organization.
Oh, thank you so very much, Blaine. Oh, this is a masterclass. Thank you so very much for sharing your insights and perspectives and learning with us. I'm truly grateful for coming back a second time as well.
Yes, yeah.
All right. I think we're running out of time again. Cheers, bye, take care.
Okay, bye for